Hey folks, it's Abby. August was not one of my most productive reading months, but despite that I still read 11 books and 4,094 pages. So I really shouldn't complain. But I was watching the Olympics, I ended up being on holiday with my partner, we didn't go anywhere, just a staycation, and then the Paralympics, which means that I wasn't reading as much, I wasn't listening to audiobooks as much, and it had a fairly big impact on my reading. 11 books is the second smallest month I've had so far. However, I'm aware that 11 books is still fantastic, and I'm very pleased with what I managed to read, so I don't mind. For the rest of the stats, I listened to only 56 hours of audiobook. Kind of. I think it's actually 58. I've been listening to the Scullery Pleasant podcast / audiobook as it's been coming out. That's not finished yet, so it doesn't go into my overall stats, but I think because they're around 30 minutes each and there's been 4 episodes so far, that means that I've actually listened to about 58, but they will be included in next month's wrap-up, so it's fine, but 56 hours officially. The oldest book I read this month was Trollbridge by Terry Pratchett, which was released in 1992. It's also the only ebook I read. And the biggest book was European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss, which comes in at 706 pages. I really loved this one. I enjoyed them both, but I loved this one. For the final section of my stats, we have genre. So I have my stuff down here in my little notebook that I got from Becca from the Comic Book Sanctum's website. Link is always down below, by the way. You get a 30% discount code. Anyway, genre, I read 7 fantasy books, 1 non-fiction, 2 historical and 1 sci-fi. For the nationality of the authors, I read 5 English authors and 4 Americans. Very pleased, love when the Americans are not the biggest number on my list. 1 Japanese and 1 Swedish. And for the format, I read 5 paperbacks, 2 hardbacks, 3 audiobooks and 1 ebook. This is so much shorter than every other time I have to do this because it's so much fewer books. It's actually quite nice. So let's dive into the books themselves. I am going to start with something that isn't a book and I haven't included in the stats, but just for me, which is what these videos are, I read one of my very old RSPB magazines. This is from autumn 2018. I have a lot of these just stacked up. I also get magazines from the Geological Society. So I'm just slowly making my way through them, and yes, I finished one and I'm very pleased. Now for the actual books. So the first book I read was Soul Music by Terry Pratchett. This was the 16th book in the Discworld series. For anyone who doesn't know, that series is 41 books long, not including any like 0.5s that are in there. It's a big one. I'm loving it. This was a Death book, so of course I adored it, and we followed Susan, Death's granddaughter. I don't want to say too much because obviously this is a few books into the Death series now, but I had so much fun with this. As always, Terry Pratchett is an amazing, wonderful author. I'm very, very lucky that I get to read these books. Then Trollbridge, which is a teeny tiny itsy bitsy book, so I don't really want to say much about it either, but it is about a hero character who's like one of the big heroes of old and used to go around sword fighting, and he goes to a troll bridge out in the countryside and ends up discussing with the troll the changes to the world that they live in and how things aren't the same as how they used to be, and it's these two enemies become friends just talking about how the world has changed and how they've been left behind. And it was actually a really interesting little book. Then for the Around the World challenge that Stuff Celine does, the prompt for this month was books, so I read Blood Sister Scribe. This has magic that is in the form of books that are written in blood with some herbs mixed in, and you read the books out loud and magic occurs. It took me a little bit to get into this one because it does have a slower start and the 3 characters that we're following are very, very separate for a while, but it is really satisfying to see how they end up interlinking, and I was really engrossed in it by the end. Then my TBR Wheel pick for last month, and that was Agates of Lake Superior by Dan and Bob Lynch. This is a non-fiction all about different rocks that you can find in this area of Minnesota. Making sure I get that right. I really enjoyed this, lots to learn, not something I would recommend for most people, but if you live in the area or you have an interest in any sort of geology, it's a really well written book. It explains the agates, it is useful for people who know about rocks and who don't. I had a good time with this one. Before We Forget Kindness by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I was sent this by the wonderful folks over at Book Break, thank you so much. I adore this entire series with all of my heart. So I was so excited to be able to pick this one up early. It is publishing on the 19th of September, so do make sure you go and pick it up and carry on this series. If you don't know the series, it is a cafe in Tokyo is where it starts. And in this cafe, if you follow certain rules, you can travel back in time. And it's all about interpersonal human connections, regrets, love, and grief. And the series is just beautiful. I love reading it every single time. You can technically read all of the books as standalones. I'd recommend at least doing that with book 2. But they can all be read as standalones, but you do learn more about the continuous characters as you go through the series, and so you do get more out of it that way. So, oh, there's my bookmark from when I read it. But yes, this is such an amazing book. As always, I adore this series. Then I read The Blood Gift by N.E. Davenport. This was my TBR Die pick for last month. I am so glad that I finished out this duology. It is such a great book. I will say I wasn't expecting the sexual scenes in here. This one I listened to via audiobook when I was travelling for work. Unexpected sex scenes whilst on a train was not on my bingo card for 2024, but here we are. Other than that, I had a great time with this one. I think that the way that the plot was explored and developed was done really well. In the first book, we follow Ikenna, who is a young black woman in a majority white country, and so she is seen as less than, but she's actually very powerful and part of these Praetorians who are warriors, trained up warriors, and stuff happens where she loses her grandfather, he is murdered, and she finds out that things in this Praetorian scheme and in this layout of her country aren't what they seem, and she is trying to find out what's going on. And then in this one, she's trying to fix it. I feel like that's vague enough to not give any spoilers. And yes, I love this. It is influenced, of course, by the Roman Empire, but there are also influences from France's colonisation of North Africa and events that happened there, and the magic system in this book is really fascinating, and I'm kind of mad that it's only duology so I don't get to find out even more about the in-depth workings of it. You do definitely find out enough, it's still satisfying, but I would just love more. Then the TBR Jar pick was Voyage of the Damned by Frances White, and I had such a fun time with this one. I did not pay attention to what it was about. Who knows, who cares, but it turns out it's like a fantasy mystery set on a boat, so it's like a locked room mystery with fantastical characters who have magic powers, and it was so much fun. I really enjoyed the banter. There was fantastic male-male relationships in here, as well as a couple of female-female ones, but they weren't as prominent, and I just had such a fun time with it. I absolutely blasted through reading it. The writing is a fair size, so I actually just blasted through reading this, didn't want to put it down every time I was reading it, but I kept picking it up late at night, so I was like, it's 1 AM, I need to go to bed. Which was incredibly frustrating, but unfortunately I was doing stuff during the day. I think that the mystery aspect of this one was done really well. You're not entirely sure what's happening, partly because of the traditional locked room, like everyone's on one boat, no one else is there mystery, and also with the magical aspects that we don't know about and that not knowing is woven into it. This was just really fun, done really well. I don't know if I'll ever reread it because whilst it is fantastical, it is also a mystery, so I'm not sure if I will reread it. However, I really enjoyed the process of reading it, and I would recommend picking this one up. And this edition from Goldsboro is gorgeous, like, oh, there's nothing under the dust jacket, how disappointing. But the edges are pretty, so that's fine. And then for the only non-TBR book, other than the tiny Discworld extra one that I managed to squeeze in this month, and that is The Sudden Appearance of Hope by Claire North. I had a little bit of extra reading time available to me before the start of the Middle-earthathon, and I wanted to go with something that I thought was going to be quick, so that I wouldn't still be reading it whilst I was trying to do the Middle-earthathon, and I know that I read through Claire North very quickly. In this book we follow a young woman named Hope who at the age of 16 starts to be forgotten by everybody, including her parents, and so she is homeless, she is stateless, she can't have a job, she can't have a bank account, because the second that she turns away from somebody, within 60 seconds they will forget that she existed. So if she goes to the hospital, NHS, it's free treatment, wonderful, but the nurse walks away and 60 seconds forgets that she was there, so then she doesn't get any follow-on treatment. And she, of course, then turns to a life of crime, because how else is she supposed to survive? And we are following her as she had been stealing some diamonds from this woman, and it links into an app called Perfection. And Perfection is like an amalgamation of everything that's wrong with social media today. People doing exactly what this app tells them to earn points to be seen as better in society. And she then, because she steals from someone who's involved with this, she then gets into this whole app situation, and it goes from there. I really enjoyed this. Some fantastic discussions, of course, on how social media is influencing the world and what people are like when they try to stop it, and also just very interesting to read about someone who is always forgotten. It's like Addie LaRue but crime, rather than whatever it was that she was doing. I enjoyed Addie LaRue, but I can see why other people didn't. So yeah, this one is absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend it if you were curious about the concept of Addie LaRue, because this one I flew through. I adore Claire North's work, everything she writes. Then for my Middle-earthathon reads, I'll leave my Middle-earthathon announcement video up here because there are events happening in September, October, November and December, so you can also join in with those. But for the actual week-long read-along, the first book I read was Wassergrissen by Björn Bergenholtz. This is in Swedish and was my prompt for short book. I had to look up a lot of the words in here. I actually ended up struggling with one phrase, if I can find it. Come on. Again, I don't speak Swedish, so my apologies for pronunciation. Lossa Mäseskurten. We didn't know what that was. And when I say we, I mean my Swedish friend who lives in Sweden and is Swedish. She also didn't know what this was, and I was like, well, if I don't know, and you don't know, and Google doesn't know, how the hell is a child supposed to know? I then spoke to someone who knows no Swedish but does have ship knowledge, like boat knowledge, and she is saying that it's Mäseskurten could potentially be like lowering the sails. Like lossa is obviously like loosen, so maybe it's lowering the sails because apparently they do that when there's issues with boats. I don't know. So maybe it's that. But it's a very old term from the 1600s. This is a little kids book all about a piggy on the Vasa ship. The Vasa ship was supposed to be this great royal warship for the war against Poland, and it sank not far out of the harbour. Not really out of the harbour. And so it's this story about this little piggy who ends up on the boat and manages to survive the experience. Thankfully. No dead pigs involved in this book. Then my biggest book of the month, yes, I read this in a week, less than a week actually, I think I read it in like 5 days, not sure how, and that is European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. This is the second book in the Athena Society series, with the first book being, oh god, what is it? The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. And that one is a lot shorter than this one. This is the biggest book in the trilogy. Oh, I've bent a page. How dare I? I loved this so much. I think I may have enjoyed it more than the first one. Throughout this series we are following some young women who are all daughters of and or creations of the men who are involved in a lot of classic sci-fi fantasy, mainly sci-fi, books. So we have Catherine Moreau from The Island of Dr. Moreau, we have Beatrice Rappaccini, we have Mary Jekyll, Diana Hyde, Justin Frankenstein. So they are all from these classic stories that you have heard of, at least, if not read. I've read most of them. The only one I haven't read, I believe, is the one about Rappaccini, which I do need to pick up at some point because it's quite a short one. But these are all young women who have been created, whether naturally or unnaturally, and then impacted by these men and their creations, and they are trying to stop these men from doing more awful things and creating more women or men who are like them and can't live a normal life. They also solve mysteries whilst doing this. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are characters in this series, and in this one, as the title suggests, they end up traipsing across Europe via various forms of transportation, and I really, really enjoyed this. It was just so much fun, such a good time. The characters are wonderful. You get little interspersions occasionally where they are speaking to one another whilst the book is being written, which adds a lot of fun into the book. And I read this via audio, which you would think, oh, that's how you got through it so quickly, but I wasn't at work. Like, I was just actively choosing to listen to this rather than doing anything else. I was loving this story so much. I can't recommend the series enough. It's so much fun. I forgot to mention, this was for the family and or found family prompt. This has both genetic family and also found family in it. And then for the prompt of food on the cover or in the title, I went with The Bitter Trade by Piers Alexander, which has coffee beans on the cover, and that is counting, okay? This one is set in 1688 and follows a young man who's moved from a little town. Does it say where? It's in Essex, and he moves from Essex to London, and because his father's past is catching up with him, and this is in the time where William of Orange is coming to essentially conquer the UK and become its monarch rather than James the Third, I think it is? Whoever came after Charles II, whichever number James that was, I think it's James III. So he's coming to overthrow James III and be the new king of Britain and of England. I guess England at this time. English monarchy, the confusion. This was very, very interesting by the end. And I was really curious as to how things were going to play out. We got some kind of unexpected revelations and really interesting plot points. However, it's really weird because he kind of mentions it. Like, he says at the end in like a note to the reader, this is from Piers Alexander as Piers Alexander, saying, if anything, Calumny's story underplays the challenges of being a woman. But when he's writing earlier, like especially in the first like third, I almost DNF'd it at 100 pages because the writing was very similar to Ken Follett's. If you haven't seen my review, which I'd be surprised if you hadn't, his book Pillars of the Earth is very, the women are second place and not seen as real characters. This does improve as the book goes on, but for the first 100 pages I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with this author? Like, women are people too, man. It does improve massively as the book goes on. It's still not equal, but like less offensive to read. It's fine. I wouldn't have picked up on it necessarily. I would have just known that the author was a male writing. But at the very beginning, it's really off-putting. So I will mention that. So it's up to you whether or not you wish to continue with that. But the actual kind of mystery and plot line that's going on behind this young man trying to survive when he has a bounty essentially on his head because of his father's actions during the whole Charles I, Charles II, Cromwell situation, and then seeing how that resolves and what happens there is actually very interesting. And I read the last like 170 pages in pretty much one sitting yesterday as I film this. So it's a very weird one. It's not one I'm going to recommend. I'm still deciding whether or not it's going to stay on my shelves because of that first 100 pages. However, I did end up enjoying it. It's a curious one. And these are the books that I managed to read in August. So like I said, it's a much smaller stack than usual, but that's a good thing because it means I can actually lift it up. Just about. But I also think that the same sort of thing is going to happen in September. I have another bigger TBR because of some arcs and some read-alongs that I'm in. If you want to see my TBR, you can see that there. So yeah, it's another bigger TBR in general, so I think I'm probably only going to manage what is on my TBR, but I'm very excited for those books, so I'm not mad. And I'm excited for the Paralympics, so it's all good. Let me know down below how many books you managed to read in August. If it's one, that's fantastic. It's still one more than most people will read in the entirety of 2024. So don't forget that. And also, this is my entire life, man. All I do is read and watch sports, apparently. Just sport and reading. I enjoy it, and that's what matters. Thank you so much for watching, folks. If you'd like to see some more from me and see how I get on with my September reads, then please do hit the subscribe button down below. Dislike the video if you hated it, and I will see you folks in the next one. Bye!